Hey, my lore-loving friends. Welcome back to Loreplay. If you're tuning in from Vegas, New Orleans, Salem, or Pittsburgh, do me a favor and keep your eyes peeled for those billboards. You might just spot a familiar face. And am I talking about myself? Of course I'm fucking talking about myself. You might catch a glimpse of a larger-than-life Dana Pereira plastered across the skyline. If you happen to see me on one, though, do me a favor and snap a picture and tag me in it at LorePlayPod, because I can't see them where I'm from, and I kind of want to freak out about it like a totally normal, emotionally stable adult. Okay? Tonight, though, we're headed back across the pond for one of the eeriest, most debated cases of reincarnation ever recorded. Whether you're a believer or you think reincarnation is a bunch of hooey, you have to admit that some of the claims are intriguing as fuck. Even people listening to dispute it get some sort of enjoyment out of the puzzle pieces. What's great is this week there's no spinning heads or Ouija boards or demonic entities inhabiting dolls to trick you into possessing your body. Just two very normal kids that remembered things that they absolutely shouldn't. And by things they shouldn't, I mean names of toys that didn't belong to them, rooms and houses that they never lived in, and details of a death they couldn't possibly know about. Our story comes from England, but instead of pouring tea, we are spilling it. A story of grief, déjà vu, and maybe the universe's most unsettling copy and paste job, the Pollock twins. Our story begins in Hexham, England in the 1950s. Picture a sleepy market town where everybody knows your business before you do. Rows of houses, cobblestone streets, and weather so consistently gloomy that seasonal depression was just depression. In one of those tidy little homes lived the Pollocks, John and Florence, and their daughters, Joanna, age 11, and Jacqueline, age 6. They were a picture of post-war British normalcy. Tidy house, tidy hair, and emotions buried somewhere under 12 layers of polite repression. John ran a local grocery delivery business, pedaling through the streets with milk crates and bread. Florence stayed home, raising the girls and keeping things proper. The kind of woman who had good posture and manners written straight into her DNA. Joanna, the elder sister, was bright, kind, and loved playing pretend with her little sister. Jacqueline was more mischievous, wild curls, wild imagination, and a scar on her forehead from wild antics and a childhood tumble. Together, they were inseparable. Life was simple, predictable even, until it wasn't. Now insert trigger warning here, because this next part has to do with children dying, and not that we need to say it, but not a fan of kid death, like 0 stars, do not recommend. On Sunday, May 7th, 1957, it's a crisp spring morning with a kind of sleepy calm. The church bells hadn't even finished their chime when Florence was straightening ribbons and smoothing down the collars of her 2 daughters. The girls were chattering about Sunday school and the promise of sweets afterwards, their little patent leather shoes clicking against the cobblestone as Florence reminded them, as mothers do, don't scuff your shoes on the way to church. They left, hand in hand, joined by a neighborhood friend. It should have been an ordinary walk through their quiet market town, that short, familiar route that they'd taken countless times before. But a few streets over, another story was unraveling. A local woman named as Marjorie Hemsley was behind the wheel of a car. She was known in Hexham as a troubled soul. Neighbors whispered she'd recently suffered a breakdown after losing custody of her own children. That morning, she was reportedly in a state of acute distress and possible overdose. As she turned onto the road where the Pollock girls were walking, something in her snapped. Her car suddenly lurched forward, swerving wildly. Tires screamed against the pavement as she lost control, mounting the sidewalk. The impact was immediate and devastating. The children never even had time to react. Joanna, Jacqueline, and their friend were struck with such force that they were thrown several feet, landing motionless on the cold pavement. Later, it is said that Marjorie was trying to take her own life. The children weren't collateral damage, they were a target. Florence was still at home, tidying up breakfast dishes when there was a frantic knock at the door. A neighbor, pale and stammering, blurted something out about an accident near the church, and she didn't wait to hear more. She ran through the garden gate, down the lane, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. When she reached the scene, the crowd had already gathered, and her husband, John, was being held back by police. John had gotten there first, had heard the commotion from his delivery rounds and rushed toward the source. The moment he turned the corner and saw the wreckage, the crumpled car and the tiny bodies lying still on the ground, something inside him broke. He pushed through the bystanders, shouting his daughter's names. Joanna's ribbons had come loose, tangled in her hair. Jacqueline's small hand still curled around her sister's. Both were lifeless. Witnesses said he fell to his knees beside them, his cries unlike anything they'd ever heard. He gathered them in his arms, his hands streaked with blood and dust, refusing to let go even as the constables tried to pull him away. He kept whispering, my girls," over and over, as though saying it might bring them back. Florence arrived moments later and collapsed when she saw them. There are no words for that kind of grief, the kind of grief that hollows out a person and leaving only echoes. And that's where the story, although very tragic, starts getting really weird. John and Florence were obviously never the same after that day. I mean, of fucking course they weren't. How could you be? But the way they grieved would soon set them on a path that defied explanation. Florence turned inward, clinging to practicality and prayer. John, however, began to believe the unthinkable, that their daughters were not truly gone. John had always been curious about spirituality. He was raised Catholic, but questioning. I mean, as you should. Remember our rules, right? Question everything. He'd read about reincarnation, the idea that souls don't die, they reboot. And after losing Joanna and Jacqueline, that belief turned into obsession. He became convinced that his daughters would return. He told friends, neighbors, even the local priest, they'll come back to us. Florence begged him to stop. She's like, John, you are making people talk. Like, it's already bad enough that we're the couple with the dead kids. Must you make it weird? But John didn't care. The loss had hollowed him out, and that belief was the only thing that filled the space. He believed fiercely that his daughters' souls were coming back. They were just, waiting. And then, a year later, Florence got pregnant. With twins. Twin girls. You can almost hear the cosmic record scratch. On October 4th, 1958, she gave birth in Hexham Hospital to their twin girls. But get this, there were no twins in either family. Not on John's side, not on Florence's, not even some twice-removed cousin, sister's niece. There was nothing. Statistically speaking, Florence had about as much of a chance randomly conceiving twins as she did of having tea with the Wicked Witch of the fucking West. For Florence, it felt like the universe had just handed her a plot twist she did not sign up for. For John, it was confirmation. But the goosebumps didn't stop there. It was clear that they were identical. They named them Jillian and Jennifer, and Jillian was the eldest by a whopping 10 minutes. When the nurses cleaned the babies and handed them to Florence, one detail nearly made her heart drop straight out of her butthole. Jennifer, the younger twin, had a small, pale birthmark on her left hip. It wasn't just a birthmark, though. It was in the exact same spot and shape as one that her late daughter, Jacqueline, had. And then Florence noticed another, a faint silvery line, a scar etched just above Jennifer's right eyebrow, the same spot that Jacqueline had once had a scar from her childhood accident. Now, staring down at her newborn, it was as if her lost child's body had duplicated right in front of her, inside of her. John saw it too, and his eyes lit up like Christmas. "See," he said, practically vibrating with vindication. Florence shot him a look like, "Don't you dare fucking go there." And she said, "No, that's not proof of reincarnation. That is proof of genetics." But there was no denying the unease that crept into the room, and the coincidences didn't stop there. At first, Florence brushed off John's reincarnation talk, the way you swat away a fruit fly that won't leave your wine alone. The twins were babies, adorable, drooling, wailing bundles of chaos, not mystical proof of life after death. Life got on, they moved to a different house in a different town, and they were finding their way through their new normal. But as they grew, weird little moments started piling up like cosmic breadcrumbs. By the time Jillian and Jennifer were old enough to toddle around, Florence began noticing things she couldn't easily explain. For starters, the toys. After the accident, Florence had boxed up all of Joanna and Jacqueline's old belongings and stored them in the attic. Dolls, building blocks, toy prams, stuffed animals. They were meant to stay there, a shrine to a time that she couldn't bear to open. When the twins were about 3, they brought down the old toy box, and the twins ran straight to 2 specific toys and called them by their specific names, the exact names their late sisters had given them. Florence swore she never mentioned it. She sat there, racking her brain to remember, did she ever mention their names? But she hadn't. She hadn't told them anything. She was sure of it. And they were toddlers. They couldn't possibly remember items they had never seen. Now, I'm not saying kids don't do weird, creepy shit. When mine was 2, he told me he wanted to wear my skin, so I get it. But this was next level weird. It didn't stop with the toys, though. Things escalated when the Pollocks decided to return to Hexham for a visit. It was meant to be innocent, fun, quiet trip to see relatives, stretch their legs in familiar streets, and maybe remind themselves that life could still be normal. As the car wound through the narrow English lanes, Florence tried to ignore the way her stomach tightened. Hexham wasn't just a hometown, it was a graveyard of memory. Before John could even park, the girls went quiet, that eerie, synchronized stillness that only twins can pull off. Then Jennifer, sitting by the window, spoke softly but with certainty. "That's where we used to go," she said, pointing to a schoolyard across the street. Jillian chimed in, her voice bubbling with recognition. "And there's where we played on the swings," she said, pointing toward a small park just beyond. John's hands froze on the steering wheel. He knew those places. They weren't just random landmarks. They were where Joanna and Jacqueline used to play. That was the school they attended and the park where they'd scraped their knees. But Jillian and Jennifer had never set foot on that playground or in that school. For him, it was proof that his daughters had come back. Something to throw in the whole town's face that called him crazy. For Florence, though, it was horror. It wasn't beautiful. It was unnatural. The universe is not supposed to work like this. But The twins didn't stop. They pointed out familiar corners and cobblestones, naming streets that no one had ever told them about. They thought they were going to take the girls for a walk down memory lane, and as it turns out, the girls took them. That night, tucked away in a spare room of her sister's house, Florence tried to convince herself that sleep would smooth everything over. Maybe if she could just close her eyes and breathe, the creepy weirdness would just stop. That Hexham, the town she used to call home, wouldn't reach its cold little fingers back into her life. Jennifer, the younger twin, the one who had Jacqueline's very same birthmark and scar, started to whimper in her sleep. At first it was just the soft sound of a dream turning dark, and then it escalated. A scream tore through the silence. Florence was out of bed in an instant. She rushed to the girl's side, heart hammering, that familiar maternal dread crawling up her spine. Jennifer's tiny fists were balled tight. "The car!" she screamed. "The car hit me!" Jennifer's eyes were still shut, her face twisted in pain. Then came another nightmare, days later. Same theme, same terror. "The blood's coming out of my eyes," she sobbed. "The car couldn't stop." These weren't your garden variety kid dreams about monsters under the bed or spooky shadows in the closet. These were very specific. She wasn't imagining fear, she was remembering it. Florence would scoop her up, whispering the same line every mother says when she's out of explanations. "It's just a dream, sweetheart. It's just a dream." But she didn't believe it because those exact words, the car, the blood, the eyes, matched the scene that Florence had spent years trying to forget. The way her daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline, looked after the crash. The way their faces had been marked. And those details, they're not exactly something she wanted to share and couldn't wait to talk about, especially with her two youngest children. So how could Jennifer know? How could she remember something that she never lived? And talk about opening an old wound, the trauma has trauma at this point. During the day, the twins would chatter about people Florence knew, or rather used to know, from Hexham. They'd call out the names of friends of Joanna and Jacqueline. They'd point to landmarks, to shops, to streets they'd never set foot on, and every word sank Florence a little deeper into dread. I mean, what's the protocol on punishing kids for endlessly talking about their past life as your previous kids? There's not exactly an instruction manual for that kind of thing. Then came the day when Jillian picked up a toy car, one of the few toys that had survived from Joanna and Jacqueline's old things. She picks it up and nonchalantly says, "This is the car that killed us." Jennifer nodded. "Yes, the car. It was red." Florence damn near spit out her tea, which, by the way, if that cup hasn't been spiked with something strong by now, what are you even doing, Flo? The car had been red, but she'd never told them that. She didn't even talk about that in front of adults. Florence started to get pissed. She started thinking, I figured it out. It must be my husband. Later that evening, she confronts him. "You've been talking to them," she said. "You've been filling their heads with nonsense." But John swore he hadn't. He didn't need to. The twins already knew. John, on the other hand, looked like a man who was floating on cloud nine from his divine validation. Every strange word, every uncanny comment was another check mark next to his theory. He had always been the believer. After the accident, his faith twisted into something else, something desperate. He told friends that God had promised him the girls would return. He even claimed to have felt their souls near him before Florence became pregnant again. And when the doctor announced twins, he'd smiled and said, "You see, I knew it." And soon, the whispers of reincarnation would go beyond the Pollock house and dump straight into the streets of the neighborhood. Florence tried to keep it quiet. Because, let's be honest, my reincarnated daughters are remembering their own deaths isn't exactly the kind of small talk you drop into conversation in the mom group. It started with a neighbor who had overheard the twins in the garden. The girls were playing, giggling like normal kids, reincarnated or not. When Jillian said, "Remember when we used to go to school there?" And Jennifer said, "Yes, before we died." Before we died. That's enough to raise an eyebrow on a certain eavesdropping neighbor. It was probably like goddamn Christmas to her. Those girls gave her something to gossip about in a small town. What a gift. Word obviously got around, and by the end of the week, people were whispering about the Pollock twins. Everybody's famous in a small town. Even the girls' teachers started noticing things. They'd draw pictures of cars, sometimes crashed ones, with two little girls inside. When the class lined up to cross the street, Jennifer would grip her sister's hand tight and cry out, "The cars, they'll hit us again." And it wasn't just memory at this point, it was personality. Jillian was confident, nurturing, and protective, seemingly embodying her older sister Joanna. And Jennifer was impulsive, a little reckless, and fond of climbing things she shouldn't. She was pure Jacqueline. Florence's sister, who'd been skeptical at first, started to look pale whenever the twins spoke. Because how could they know these things? By that point, the story had outgrown the Pollocks. Journalists started to call, parapsychologists wrote letters, and somewhere across the Atlantic, a man named Dr. Ian Stevenson took notice. Stevenson wasn't your average paranormal hobbyist. He was a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, a man who collected reincarnation cases the way some people collect stamps. He had been quietly documenting children who claimed to remember past lives, and when he heard about the Pollock twins, he booked a flight faster than you could say funding grant. When Stevenson arrived in England, he wasn't there to debunk or sensationalize. He was known for his meticulous clinical approach to cases of alleged reincarnation in children. The Pollock case was one of his earliest and most famous studies. At the time of his visit, Jillian and Jennifer were still young, just 4 or 5 years old enough to express memories and opinions, but not old enough to have a filter about what they were saying out loud to people in public. If you know kids, you know their filters take a little time to grow in. My son once told a waiter at a Michelin star restaurant with his whole chest that he would give it a 5 out of 10. So still waiting for that filter to kick in. Dr. Stevenson noted the physical similarities. Jennifer's matching birthmark on her left hip, the same forehead scar Jacqueline had gotten. He recorded their speech patterns, their memories, their drawings, their reactions to familiar places. He interviewed John and Florence separately, checking for inconsistencies. He spoke to relatives, teachers, and the townspeople. And the conclusion he drew was, well, controversial. He wrote that the case was one of the most impressive suggestive of reincarnation, noting that the twins' statements and behaviors corresponded closely to the lives of the deceased children. The story hit newspapers, then television. People argued in pubs and churches over whether it was proof of life after death or just a desperate father's fantasy projected onto his kids. John Pollock basked in it. For him, this was again vindication, the ultimate fuck you to a skeptical world. Florence, meanwhile, hated every second. She did not want fame. She wanted peace. She wanted her children, all of them, to be seen as who they were, not who they used to be. But peace was long gone. And once your family becomes a reincarnation headline, good luck getting that genie back in the bottle. Because now the world was watching. And the Pollock twins had basically become the poster children for death not being the end of the story. But, of course, as with anything that takes the public by storm, there were skeptics, big ones, because something like this, people take personally. It is almost offensive to suggest it might be a thing. Like, I'm not sure if I suggested reincarnation existed or punched your cat in the throat right in front of you, Carol. And alongside skepticism are the theories. And we here at Loreplay love to hear theories. One of the theories was it's straight up reincarnation. Souls come back. Boom. Done. Two dead sisters returned as twins with the same birthmarks, memories, and trauma triggers. Clean. Chilling. Kinda poetic. Theory 2 was parental projection. Grieving parents accidentally script their children into the roles of their dead siblings. The girls internalize it. Everyone believes it. It's sad, but psychological. And let's be real. Parents fuck up their kids all the time. But that kind of trauma, it is perfectly reasonable to think that their grief made them accidentally put that on their kids. It, unfortunately, happens all the time. The third theory was energetic imprint or a shared consciousness. And this one is interesting because it's kind of like what gets passed through pregnancy. Not genetics per se, but maybe trauma leaves a psychic fingerprint on the physical world. And these twins, born into the same family, absorbed that kind of energy. Kind of like trauma by osmosis. Fun band name, by the way. There are probably many other theories, but maybe the universe just has a dark sense of humor. Two girls die. A year later, their mother gives birth to identical twins with identical markings. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's cosmic deja vu. Maybe it's just life being weird and messy as hell. Regardless, as the twins got older, the memories faded, which is pretty status quo for kid reincarnation stories. The girls stopped talking about the accident. They grew up normal, went to school, made friends, and moved on. The reincarnation chatter disappeared. Decades passed. The twins became women, and they mostly avoided the spotlight and had a pretty quiet life. Then, in 2002, tragically, Jillian died in a house fire. In 2024, the story blew up again, thanks to a podcast called Extrasensory, hosted by Will Sharp, which reinvestigated the whole thing. They tracked down Jennifer, who finally broke her silence after 60 years. She said she's about 80% sure she and her sister were reincarnations of Joanna and Jacqueline. But she also said, no, her father didn't coach them, and her mother never pressured her. But then came a twist. Two of John Pollock's granddaughters claimed their grandfather was manipulative and controlling, that he made the reincarnation story up and forced the family to go along. They even said Florence told them privately that the whole thing was exaggerated. So, what do we do with that? Was this a miracle or just a man trying to make sense of an unbearable loss? Or maybe a man that sensationalized a story because he wanted notoriety and fame? What do you think? Were Jillian and Jennifer proof that souls recycle? Or were they just born into and drowned in their parents' trauma dump? I'll tell you this, whether it's reincarnation or grief's greatest hallucination, the story hits deep because who among us hasn't wanted a second chance at goodbye? The Pollock twins remind us that loss doesn't just vanish. It echoes through generations, through memories, through scars we can't quite explain. And if death really is just a doorway, maybe these girls were proof that sometimes love walks right back through it. I like the thought of reincarnation, and personally, I am a believer. I won't get too woo-woo on you yet because I'm still trying to get you all to like me. But I also find the concept a little terrifying. I mean, mostly because I do not want to come back here. If I'm on the other side and they tell me I have to come back to this dumpster fire of a planet, I will motherfucking riot. Please don't make me go back there. Well, guys, that is it for today's episode of Loreplay. If you happen to have any weirdo friends that like to hear stories like this, do me a favor, share it with them maybe. And until next time, if you do happen to die dead this week, do me a favor and reincarnate at least long enough to download my new episodes. Okay? All right, thanks. You're the best. Bye.